Okay, we're now live. Let's start with uh, Cassie. Cassie, I think we wanted to have you touch upon, I don't know if you got the word or not, I hope you did, on the seed capital provisions of the of 159, and how Vita might fit in, or how something like this might compare to the kinds of things that Vita might finance, and some of the parallels there. So
Yeah, Vida's mentioned.
I'll assume you have read section 13, I think it is, of 159, and
Yeah,
I'll let you tell us what your thoughts on. Have you, and whether you've had any connection whatsoever with the seed capital fund and with David Bradbury in particular, who I think is the main player in running that program.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm not sure that I've actually testified in this committee at this session, so I appreciate it. Um, so to answer directly your first questions, yes and yes and yes to all of them. The seed fund was established in 2010, and Vita is, I guess the way to describe it, the conduit for that money. Um, so it's on our balance sheet. We are a minority, say, owner, if you will, of the fund, but we are not the manager of the fund. That is through David Bradbury and his operations with VSET. So it's a passive sort of investment for us, if you will. I'm on the advisory board, and there are 4 other slots on the advisory board, but I am not involved in the investment decisions for any of the money allocations. I'm simply on the advisory board. But Vita has had this experience since 2010 when the fund was established. So to have this sort of follow on investment makes sense in that the vehicle and the process and everything's already set up, it's established. As far as aligning with what Vita does, it's very much aligned with what we do, in the sense that it is in the same economic development world. We understand what the fund does. However, it's in the earlier stages, it's equity investment. Vita does debt. So in the spectrum of financing and investment, it's on the earlier stage, the higher risk stage. Um, Often, well, I shouldn't say often, but there have been instances where both the fund and Vita have made investments or debt um, transactions into the same entity. But so there is that alignment, and it works out well in that sense that we understand the type of businesses that the fund is investing in, and it's a nice sort of pipeline, and um, you
Can
know
you can
as
you
I
can you
was
can you
established.
can you give us an example of a business that got seed capital for early risky or angel investment, uh, and then you came along and gave a loan as well? And how does that work? Do they have an obligation in any way to pay one back before the other, or how does that work?
Sure. So typically, any debt would take precedence in sort of priority over equity. So if there's a loan involved, that has sort of priority in repayment over equity. So um, there's I think David provided you with the annual report, and there's 20, the fund has invested in 23 companies since the initial, since the fund was established. And there's a couple in there that Vita has made co-investments in. And, I can tell you honestly, they don't always work out. And that's the way that equity investments work. Not everything's going to be a home run. And so,
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I don't know if you can see us.
Okay.
Cassie, hi, Allison. To that, I'd just like to follow up on that, because this was set up as a evergreen or a revolving fund. And, we have a number of other revolving funds that we oversee in this committee. The most, one that we've watched since infancy is not only this one, but the down payment assistance program. And it has started to be revolving. And I guess one of our concerns is this is not so revolving. Maybe this is either misnamed or misthought of. But I think one of our concerns, I guess my first question is, how long would you expect before it actually became a revolving fund? And is that something we should, if we go forward with these investments at this time, would we want to change aspects of that?
Yeah.
And the expectations of that?
That's a great question, Senator. And I think in David's annual report, he does say that this has taken longer than originally anticipated, as far as some of the investments actually having, being able to successfully exit, which is when you get that money back and it revolves. So, that's really, as I say, I'm not involved on the investment side, which is good. You don't want me involved.
Yes, no, you shouldn't be if you're also investing in these companies. I agree. My second question is, these are often risky investments. I mean, everything with human life is risky. So all the state government does is in some way risky. On the other hand, the state isn't, quote, in business. We enable business. We hope that our policies enable business. I guess I'm just a little puzzled by why we're in business with this, why we are making investments in businesses. It's an unusual thing for us to be doing as a state, is actually investing in business rather than enabling business. Can you speak to that and how that is either appropriate for us to continue or not? And could we use this money in some other way, incenting these incredibly important businesses? There isn't anyone who isn't thinking this is an important part of our sector, our economic sector. It's just, how do we support it effectively with the dollars we have?
I think that's a really good sort of philosophical question. And I guess I would say that it's not unusual. If you look across to other states, there are a lot of states that have state or federally funded dollars going into venture capital type of programs. So this is not unique. Vermont isn't doing anything out of the box here. But I will say, it's not that you would want to appropriate huge dollars towards it to then exclude what should be, private money to really pump the engine in on the equity side. And I think Vermont is doing a good job in allocating, a small amount of money to meet certain gap funding. And that, in sense, sort of primes the pump to attract larger private money on these important sectors, what you spoke about. I mean, this is really important. And having some public money provides that sort of governance, that structure, that accountability that's not always there on the private side. So I think it works well, but you're not going to want to pour in a ton of money because that disincents the private sector, of course. So, and that's, the private sector needs to play an important role here.
Thank you.
So, as a follow-up to those questions, Cassie, of the 22 businesses that were helped by the Seed Capital Fund, are they all still functioning or some of them have failed?
Yeah.
What's that? I didn't hear your answer. I'm sorry.
Some have failed.
Okay. And for those that have continue in operation, their obligation is to repay the loan only at the time the business is sold or changes ownership?
Well, keep in mind, it's not a loan. These are
Okay.
equity investments. So could be structured as, and it's kind of all over the map, some
Well,
sort of-
David told us that I think two of the businesses they've recaptured some money, and maybe it is a misnomer in terms of calling it a revolving loan fund, but does any of this money expected to come back to the state at any time?
My guess on that would be that if there is a point in time where, this stops, there's no more seed fund the money going in, and it's in a wind down mode, and the businesses just kind of play out, and you have to wait over time for them to, they're either going to go out of business or they're going to exit. There's a public offering, whatever the plan is, and that money comes back into the fund. Ultimately, it's going to go back to the state as the state. Kind of similarly to what would happen to Vita if Vita ever were to, stop functioning. Ultimately, all the assets are owned by the state.
Okay, maybe I'm not being clear. I'm just trying to say, take an individual company that got $100,000 from the Seed Capital Fund. Is there any obligation ever to pay that back?
Well, it depends on what happens. So if it's an equity investment and that business goes out of business, nothing left over to pay it back.
Right.
Get anything back.
Right. But is there, I thought David said he had two businesses where they have paid something back. And what do they own? The amount of money that they originally got? And do they in any way, is there a requirement in terms of these seed capital loans or grants, whatever they are, is there a requirement at any particular time to pay it back?
It depends on the type of investment that's made. So if it's, so some sort of stock that goes in so that, the seed fund owns a share of that company, whatever it's valued at when, say, that company decides to buy out, or whatever the exit plan is, whatever the value is, that goes back into the fund.
Okay, so it depends on how the money was given out originally. So there will be individual terms. There's not one straight formula for these things. And are you involved in setting the formula or setting the terms, or that's totally David?
No, there's an investment committee.
And you're on the investment committee?
No, I'm not.
You're
No. There's 3 people that are on the investment committee.
Okay. Is there, in dealing with the realities of what we're facing here in terms of wanting to be as prudent as possible with this, and this is general fund money, is there a way to go to these 22 or whoever are left and say, that we helped you out And, we're being asked to come up with $900,000 of general fund. Is it time to alleviate your responsibility here and give us some money so it can recapitalize this fund? I mean, it sounds like they wouldn't be under a legal obligation, but if we had some businesses that are home runs, maybe they would be willing to give some money back into the fund, and we wouldn't have to dip into the general fund. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that would be wonderful if they get to that point in time. Usually it takes a while. Think about some of our Vermont success stories, and that is the cycle that you hope to get to. So, you think about like a dealer.com, say, and start, and if, I mean, not that the fund invested in dealer.com, but that's a success story. And the folks that own dealer.com, they made a lot of money. And so they're, able to reinvest in Vermont startups. So that is what you want to see happen. That's the ecosystem that we're trying to develop here, or that David's trying to develop here.
Okay, but you're not aware of whether he's actually gone out and asked any of his successful companies to help recapitalize the fund with the.
I'm not aware. He may be. I don't know that any are quite at that stage yet. I think there might be one or two where if he can get over the hump and maybe, maybe they need a little bit more money to get over that hump and get there, that they years might be there, but I'm not aware.
Yeah. So I'll give you an opportunity. I'm sorry, Senator Brock, did you want to say something?
I'd just like to ask a question.
Yes. Let me, before you do, just so you know, one of the things that I'm thinking about is it's challenging to me, I don't know if to other members of the committee, that we had a seed capital fund 11 years ago that was funded with $5.1 million.
Governing board
What's that?
and participation on the participating companies' boards. Is there typically that sort of relationship based on what you know?
Okay, let me finish my question and then we'll go to Senator Brock. But so my concern is that we're being asked after giving $5 million towards this, I think, in 2010, and the fund not performing anywhere near the way it was supposed to or projected to. Now we're asking for almost another $1 million to put back into it. Do you have any thoughts on why we shouldn't be concerned about that?
I wouldn't tell you not to ask those hard questions about, performance of the fund, and those are good questions for the fund manager. I can tell you that, it's part of the venture capital world that not everything's going to be a home run, and that, David has laid out in his report the reasons for why it's been challenging. And so, yeah, it has not performed in the sense that it's taken longer to get to where the fund had originally projected it would be. So I think that's a valid concern. I think that where it is now is that there are some good companies in the fund that if they, had a little bit more money, would get to where they need to be, where they will launch. And that's the goal here.
Okay, that's interesting because I hadn't heard it that way. I thought he was talking about new pots of money to go out in tranches of $20,000 to $50,000. I didn't know that he was thinking of sending more money to existing people that are in the fund because they need more. I thought the successful ones in the fund, he had a very large number of, everybody comes in and tells us that the state money, like the Housing and Conservation Board, will come in and say, well, we put this money in and we raise 17-1 leverage, and he has a number similar to that. I think it's really hard to draw the line directly to the small amount that the state is putting in to say you multiply it by 17 times just because of what the state put in. But I didn't realize that, and maybe it's not the case. I thought he was talking about refund
New
new companies, not trying to give more money to companies that are on the edge or something.
Well, I think it's both. And so I don't mean to mislead you, but I was trying to answer the question about the fund's performance.
Okay.
But you're correct in that he has also indicated that there are a number of new potential investments that he's had to say no to.
Okay. So I'm going to get to Senator Brock in a second, but I think I know the answer to this question. Do you have any money that's around that somehow you could put into this fund? Or these kinds of loan or these kinds of economic assistance? VITA's there to help promote economic development in the agriculture community and other communities, and you do help bolster these things. I realize it's kind of a different animal, but
Yeah.
maybe instead of putting new monies in, maybe looking to you as carving off a very small part of your portfolio and saying, if you believe in this and you think this is a valuable tool, and as you said in others, you started off by saying that you wouldn't put all your eggs in this basket, but maybe a little bit is appropriate. Would VITA consider supporting these businesses?
Yeah. So we potentially could. The issue with VITA is we don't have unlimited funding. We have to borrow money to make our investments in our borrowers, in our loans.
Gosh, you sound like the state.
So that's one minor, challenge, is that we don't have deposits. So we have to borrow that money. We have some equity, but that's a very risky thing to do with our equity, is to put it into a high risk investment. Having said that, it's not out of the question for us to look at something that I wouldn't want to put it into these new ones that David's talking about, that I think, you just mentioned, Senator, the
Right.
one this bill might be geared towards, but perhaps some that are in the fund already that have matured a little bit and are at that point where they need that boost. And that's something that David has approached me on, and I need to very carefully think about that and talk to my ALCO committee, my committee at the board level, as to would we want to do something like that. It's our investment arm, because that would be something new and different for us. It would be a higher risk type of investment. So it's not outside of the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting. Senator Brock, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please go ahead with your question.
Well, I think it might be useful if the committee had a half an hour of Venture Capital 101. Based on the questions that asked, I think it would be useful if the committee had a better picture of what venture capital is and how this fund plays within it. This issue of states having venture capital entities is not new and is not unusual. There's some 30 states that have venture capital operations as it is right now. And there are various ways that states or state entities do participate in venture capital. I don't know that we're entirely clear on exactly how the ventures work, but within Vermont and within the Vermont seed capital fund that David manages. But typically, the venture capital is one investor. In our case, typically not the lead investor, although it could be, who invests in new ventures that meet certain criteria, and that it is a high risk, high reward business. Often we are one, as I understand it, of several venture capitalists that may invest in these companies. And the goal is that the companies eventually move to the next stage of funding, and whether that be a public offering or the ability to get more conventional loan funds. And then at some point, venture capitalists are cashed out, or they continue to ride as their investment increases in value. But it is not at all unusual for there to be additional needs for subsequent rounds of investment, in many cases by the venture capitalists who were initial investors. And so to the extent that David is asking for additional money for companies that are already in the portfolio in a conventional venture capital situation, that is not an unusual ask. That is something that is quite common. Failure rates are also quite common. And of course, what we are looking for is the Ben and Jerry's or something like that pops up that makes such a tremendous difference in value that's where the venture capitalists and the venture capital funds cash out. And I think, whether we want to have David back at some point to discuss in a little bit more detail what the plan is and how it actually works in practice, and that was a question I was asking Cassie, and I'm not sure whether she knows, is it typical that the venture capitalists or the seed capital fund simply takes an investment position as an owner of stock in a particular company? And then if it does, then the question is, to what extent does our fund, as opposed to other investors in the company, have the ability to, typically from a board membership in the company, to work with the company to determine at what point does it move to the next step? Because venture capitalists in a conventional situation often are very active in trying to figure out how to maximize their investment and how to get their money back. In other words, how to grow the company to the next step, as opposed to simply being in the same position year in and year out. And I don't have a clear picture of precisely what happens in the seed capital fund right now toward that end. I think that's what happens, but I don't know. And I think that's a question that we ought to be asking if Cassie doesn't know.
So certainly I could benefit from understanding more about seed venture capital and venture capitalism. But my concern at this point in time is that it doesn't seem, at least on the surface, and maybe it needs more than 10 years, maybe it needs 50 years, but I haven't heard evidence that we are getting a return on our investment, which I know you're very concerned about in the long run, that the amount of money we put in stimulates our economy and the state of Vermont gets some money back, and as opposed to going deeper and deeper into the hole from a $5 million program now to a $6 million program. And as you say, I think none of us really know all the details of what these structures are, when you get your money out, when you could demand your money out, and is it, the board membership or whatever, do they have some power? There's a lot of unknowns. I for one, am not opposed to venture capitalism. I think it's a good idea and we should invest in it, but I think we need to know more details of how this is structured, because to come in 11 years later and ask for more money on something that did not deliver as promised, we better know why, and what the reasons are that justify. What's the phrase? Throwing more bad money after good, or good money after bad. Senator Clarkson, what is the phrase?
Yeah, it's just good money after bad, but I don't think it's been bad. I just think we have to ask some of those questions and figure out, is it revolving? Is it a grant? Do we want, how deeply do we want to?
Yep. So the issue,
It's not a grant, and it's not really revolving until and unless you're able to cash out. And to me, the key issue with the venture capital is, are there, good investments made, and were the companies given enough help and guidance, which is also something that typically venture capitalists provide in a way, not necessarily hands off in most cases. And the question again that I think David is probably in a better position to answer is, what does the seed capital fund do to make the companies in which it invests successful, to be able to give them a return on that investment? These are not revolvers, and typically venture capitalists are not in a position to go to the companies in which they invest saying, well, you need to pay the money back. That's not how these investments work. These are investments typically in equity, and you either get a gain because the investment is sold, or there are other investors who come in that buy you out,
Right.
or the company's in a position to buy you out. That's how you get your money out, as opposed to treating it like a loan, because these are not loans.
Right. And I think we're all clear on that. I think there are still, I still have questions about, what's the expectation when they're bought out, how much comes back, what stays, what's our expectation about keeping these companies in Vermont? I mean, we're investing in these to grow Vermont's economy. If they're all going to be bought, so far, almost every one of our major successes has been bought and is now corporate headquarters or out of state. Anyway, those are good problems to have in some way, but
okay. So
and I would just answer your initial question, Randy, by saying, I think that's what David offers, is his expertise and his technical assistance from VSET is what makes this special, and why they are well linked is that VSET is the technical assistance and support for a lot of these companies. I mean, that's part of why they go well hand in glove, I think.
okay.
Well,
So
what they also do is that they partner with other venture capital firms, other investors, angel investors, and others to put together, for all intents and purposes, groups that provide combined investment, or a series of investments, or a package of investments for these companies. And I think getting a little bit more detail from David would perhaps give us all more comfort that this makes sense. The issue of how well we've done with this fund, one thing that might be useful is to compare it to other similar funds.
Yes, and we haven't done that. That would be
We
interesting.
haven't done
Look
that,
at those
but I
states.
think it's worth doing, and I don't think it's particularly hard to do.
Nope, I think it's a good point.
So we've just witnessed a preview of the rest of the morning, because we're faced with the reality that we have to make a recommendation to the Appropriations Committee. And he's asking for $900,000. This will be one of the last things we discussed this morning. And, I, for one, don't want to let go of this. I don't know how not to let go of it without telling the Appropriations Committee to put $900,000 in. It is possible. The budget bill is a long way from being inked or signed. So the House has $900,000 in. We could potentially, we have this vehicle 159, we could put language in to be looking at some of these questions here and go to conference and figure that we'll wind up at that point with more information and decide whether to agree with the 900,000 or half that amount. We have opportunities, but that's the kind of dilemma and the choices we're going to be having to face as we go forward this morning on something like that. It's just a matter of timing. Unfortunately, Jane wants our decisions by tomorrow. So that's what we're dealing with. So Cassie, unless you have something after hearing all of that that you would like to add, we'll move on to our next witness. And I don't see any other hands up in terms of committee members. So Cassie, anything else you'd like to add?
I think you've generated a very good conversation and a lot of great questions. I guess I will just end by saying that in general, from where I sit, I do see a need for equity. So the question, I guess, that you're facing is this the right vehicle for that? But right now is an opportunity to invest in companies or people that are wanting to, especially right now, with the challenges that we're facing, this is the time to invest in people that have that perseverance and that ingenuity to take those risks and have that, wherewithal to really, do it during the hard times. I really believe in that. And so I would urge you to think about that opportunity. And if there is money to do that, equity money is needed. So that's my plea here.
Could I ask you a favor? Could you connect with David and try and get back to us by maybe the end of the day if there's any possibility? I assume the House looked at this and couldn't find any, but any possibility of funding this with any of the new federal dollars that have come our way? I don't think there is, but it makes it harder for us that this is general fund dollars.
Yeah.
But if you could talk to David and, maybe make some connection with people who know, that would be great.
In particular, we were wondering if it was at all eligible for the program that is emerging that is called the where is it? It's right here. The Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund, it's the Corona Capital Projects Fund, which is 113.4 million. And it's a direct application to the feds. Treasury, of course, hasn't done guidance on it yet, but we were just wondering if it had any, if there was any way the Seed Capital Fund could benefit from that fund.
Can you repeat the title of that?
It's called the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund.
Okay.
And we were wondering about that. And then there was, there was something else that was
There's a state, the general fund that comes to the general discretionary money that comes to the state, the $1 billion that the governor has allocated for recovery grants and other capital funding projects as to, David is advocating for this. So, I assume he should have turned over every stone to see if there's some easier money here. And there's probably not, but I just want to double check.
Well, and I guess my additional question is, Cassie, in section D under 5 on page 25, there's a reference to the Fast Capital Investment Program. And I don't know where that lies. Does is that independent of our state allocation? Is that a direct federal application? That's another program that we didn't discuss as fully as we probably should have. It's called the Fast Capital Investment Program. And I don't know if that's an additional bucket of money. And it's mentioned in this bill, and I'm just not fully clear on.
Where is that?
It's on page 25 at the bottom under D, under eligibility. And I don't know what that program is, if it's, and the implication is that maybe they excluded anyway. I'd love to, one of our challenges is understanding all the interplay between what types of ARPA money is available in which bucket and how we access it, balancing all that with general fund, one-time money, and the governor's requests and our needs. It's a big Rubik's Cube.
So Cassie, were you about to answer what the fast capital fund is?
I was gonna say, I saw that in the draft bill and I wasn't familiar with it myself, so
So, yeah, we'd love clarity on those two possible funding sources.
okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, let me ask one question again about funding sources that we do need answers. We obviously don't have the federal guidance. We know that as far as the feds are concerned, that the money cannot be used for a loan, but I've not seen anything that says it can't be used for capital investment,
Right.
equity investment. And so in that case, I think one of the questions is, can we use ARPA money to give, let's say, 900,000 to the seed capital fund? The seed capital fund then takes that money and purchases equity or makes equity investments in these client companies. And then in the event that money comes back from that, it's repayment is not a loan, it's the sale of an investment. If, for example, you buy something with ARPA money and it's subsequently sold, what happens to that money? That's your more fundamental question that we've been asked in other circumstances.
Right.
And it would, my initial impression, based on what little guidance there is that might be permissible, but we just simply don't know the answer to it at this point.
Right.
And it may make the difference of whether we fund this or not. I mean, if you can put a cornerstone in a building with ARPA funds, you can put a cornerstone in an equity investment in a business. So,
Yeah.
okay. Let's, okay.
Just one thing, I believe that we did run down the equity investment piece with the CARES money. And because you do get that money back at some point in time, just like with a loan, that it would have to go back to the feds. And so I want to say we ran that.
That might not be the worst thing in the world.
It
You
might-
know, get the business going, even though you have to pay it back to the feds. I mean, it's, the idea is to leverage other investment and it could be acceptable in this case. It's not the ideal, but it could be still of great value. So we're going to have to move on. Cassie, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So we're going to move on to Heather. Good morning, Heather. How are you?
Good morning. I'm just fine. Thank you.
Got to witness a very interesting conversation, right?
Yeah, I'm learning a lot, as I always do.
So I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you back, I think we got the last thing I remember on your $2.5 million request for out-of-state marketing is I was expressing my preference for, how do you phrase it, consumer stimulus?
Regional stimulus?
No, well, in general, consumer stimulus. We hadn't decided exactly how, and the committee, I think Senator Clarkson and Senator Brock were expressing their wanting to stay with the out-of-state marketing, but there was some very preliminary discussion of maybe splitting the baby and doing some in the consumer stimulus and some in out-of-state marketing. So I just wanted to revisit what you have done in the regional consumer stimulus. I think you gave out 60 grants of $10,000 each to various entities like the Chamber of Commerce, and they all did a little variation on what they did with their money. So I want to learn a little bit more about that. And if any of the 60 really jumped out at you as being more successful than the others, and maybe I know you're probably going to say, if you're going to do that, just give us the money and we'll distribute it to the regions and they know best. But I'm still holding out hope that we could have some sort of statewide uniform program with a bigger pot of money that is not as, um, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, as loose as just giving out $10,000 grants.
Well, good morning, everybody. For the record, Heather Pelham, Commissioner Department of
Morning.
Tourism and Marketing. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that. And I'm happy to speak about the regional marketing grants. I know there was a question last time also about the destination marketing money from last fall that we spent and how do we spend it. So I do have some slides on that that I can show depending on how much time we have.
That's,
But in terms of,
that's the out-of-state marketing?
yes, yep.
Okay. Okay.
But in terms of your question about the regional grants, you're right. I did share with the committee a full report that we did do on that program. And so there are lots of details in there in terms of the different types of programs that communities ran. As you mentioned, we had a maximum award of $10,000. 90% of those were at that $10,000 mark. And, you know, about half of them, again, went to downtown organizations, chambers of commerce, those types of organizations. And, you know, they really did run the gamut in terms of different types of programs. You know, a lot of them were around local spending incentives, events, you know, basically how to leverage dollars. You know, a lot of the communities were able to get local businesses to kind of pay into that fund as well. So businesses could like buy downtown bucks and then make that money go that much further. So there were that many more consumer, you know, stimulus dollars in the community. You know, this may not be the answer you want, but I mean, I really think the flexibility of the regional approach did show to be quite successful because different communities found that different things worked for them. You know, just for instance, I think I had shared before, you know, down in the southern part of the state in the Deerfield Valley, you know, Dover area, those areas that really rely more on out-of-state marketing, they use that local stimulus to encourage folks to buy gift cards and for lodging establishments that then they could get an additional, go out to a restaurant at the same time, let's say. That type of thing might not work the same in Addison County or Orange County, where it was more about getting folks back into downtown and supporting, you know, the myriad of businesses that residents would like to access. So, you know, I think that when it comes to like broad-based consumer stimulus, I would say that, you know, things have changed a little bit in terms of the amount of, you know, federal stimulus money that now has, you know, the general population has received on a very broad level, you know, which is wonderful to see. And I think for the state to come in and kind of, you know, what could we do that would really amplify that? I feel like that really is most successful on the local level. And it has that dual ability to then support those local organizations that are trying so hard to keep their communities together, to keep those businesses intact. And, you know, that little tiny bit of that little, I mean, to them, you know, $10,000 is actually a lot of money if it helps a downtown organization kind of keep their businesses focused, keep that community focused on what can happen in that downtown area. And it doesn't have to be downtown. You know, we had grants that were focused on, you know, performing arts or, you know, other types of kind of specific areas of focus, but they just really help people to buy in and make it want to work. The testimonials in the back of that report from the towns, I mean, I didn't count them, but I would, you know, I think that one of the statistics was that, you know, I think it was 99 or 90%, 95% of them, so they agreed or strongly disagreed that they would absolutely do this again. Like they were crying for the state to do this kind of thing again.
So let me ask you a question, going back to your experience in the House on this. This 2.5 million, was that the figure that was in the budget request of the governor? And was that entirely targeted in ACCD's request towards out-of-state marketing, or did it start out with a different number and a different breadth.
Right. The administration's proposal, our proposal started out differently. It was $1 million for consumer stimulus, and it was $1 million as a seed investment into the tourism funding formula that we had proposed.
Right,
That-
right.
So,
Okay. Was that
so it
$1
was,
million?
it was split.
Okay, so the $1 million in the proposal from rooms and meals tax, there was a $1 million general fund or wherever it was coming from that would that was a base upon which the excess rooms and meals tax could add to, right? I didn't
Correct.
say that very clearly, but was that what was that 1 million plus the added excess rooms and meals? Was that targeted towards any purpose? Was it for consumer stimulus? Was it for out-of-state marketing? Did it say where it would go?
It didn't say where it would go. It would be added to the department's budget, depending on what that delta was. If we received any additional money in a year, it would come into the department's budget. And then as I saw how that would work is that then, we would be doing our planning for the next fiscal year, just like we always do. We would just have that additional resources to be able to do that kind of
Right.
out-of-state marketing.
So I guess my next question is, I think I know the answer then, if that's what you came in with, then if we took this $2.5 million, let's say, and split it between these regional consumer $10,000 grants and out-of-state marketing, you wouldn't have any problem with that.
I would like to talk about maybe what that split is, or to keep some flexibility just in terms of, making sure that. So for instance, I might start doing a replication of the regional marketing program we did before with $500,000. See what the uptake is on that. See, if we get as much interest in that as we did last time. And then we could do that again, as opposed to say maybe doing like a 50-50 split. I think that honestly, in terms of the destination marketing, real dollars do matter in terms of our competitiveness with other states. And so I don't believe that a 50-50 split, if that was, maybe as a starting point, would be appropriate. I would be more likely to go with 2 million for out of state and 500,000 for the regional marketing grants.
Okay.
The-
Could you?
Mr. May I just,
Let me just finish up on.
sorry.
Go ahead, Senator Clarkson. Mike.
Oh, I just want to tag on to the out of state. I just happened in our walk the other day to bump into the one of the Woodstock Inn chief executives who's in charge of marketing and promotion. And the drive market is so important right now as people are fearful of flying. I mean, and I could see it in the parking lot at these establishments. It is all drive market. Our New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey plates. I mean, vast majority. And so clearly that market is so important for us, particularly for the next year, until people are comfortable, coming longer distances. So
Yeah.
I really can appreciate this.
I guess just because you said that, I would argue the other side of that. I think New Yorkers and New Hampshire people know about Vermont. They don't need to be marketed. They're going to come anyhow. So,
And Heather has said to us, long term, it's the long term game is everyone else. So I get, and I get.
We'll get into that discussion certainly later on this morning. So there's not, in the $10,000 grants and the reports you got in, there's not one creative idea that stood out to you that said, wow, this really worked well. We should try and replicate this in around the state. I mean, I'm surprised if the idea was to let individual towns or downtowns come up with ideas, that we didn't get a broad range of ideas, and that one came back and reported, look how successful we were. Look at the enthusiasm we had. You can't point to one?
It's not that I would not say that there wasn't great projects that were completed. What I guess the way I would approach it is if we were to run this grant program again, I think that what I would do is I would take some of those top performing towns, have them put together a presentation of how they organized their program, why it was successful, and offer that as a like, this is what we did. This is something you can learn from, because I do think there's learnings there. But to use it that way, to then have towns kind of then interpret that as to what's really going to work for their community, as opposed to saying this one thing worked in this town, and so we want you to do it in your town.
I guess my feeling a little bit, we'll talk more about this in terms of what I like about the consumer stimulus. It is also benefits Vermonters. Anyhow, the one question I have on the consumer stimulus that, we're all learning and guidance is coming out, but it seems like restaurants are going to be well taken care of for their set aside on the federal level in ARPA. There's $28 billion nationwide going to restaurants. If we were to do a consumer stimulus program, the one group that I'm really concerned about is the bricks and mortar retail. Because a lot of people during the pandemic have gone online, and now we have a very significant pot of money for restaurants. Is there any reason why we couldn't target some consumer stimulus to bricks and mortar retail, or maybe to hotels and motels or something like that, and try and target our money better, as opposed to including every business out there?
Yeah, I think by all means we could have guidelines in terms of the priorities sectors that we would hope for this kind of stimulus money to support. I don't see a problem with that at all. I think that I would rather say these are our priorities and this is what we would use to, when we're looking at competitive grants, like this is what we would score more highly, as opposed to excluding a specific sector, just because I think that, communities have their own natural network, and it's kind of like it's the fabric that brings it all together. So I would hate to say, come downtown, but you can only use this stimulus at, 75% of the businesses downtown. You know what I mean? I'd rather say we're really looking to prioritize those that have been left out of other federal funding. And we'll use that as we evaluate what you want to do with the money, than to say, X business, we don't want to help you.
Okay. Can you just, before we let you go, or if there are other questions, in terms of the out-of-state marketing, whether it's 2.5 million or 1 million, whatever it is, that's going to be added to another pot of base funding, I assume. So I'm just trying to figure out what the total is presently without this $2.5 million for out-of-state marketing, and is it as simple? I know it's not as simple, but I'd like to hear a little bit more than it's not just TV ads of like, I love New York. What else do you do with that money? Or I love Vermont, obviously, but.
Sure. Well, if we have time, like I said, I do have a couple of slides I can show you that would try to kind of give you a range of tactics. I'm happy just to send that for you to review on your own. But I would say in general, so your question in terms of our base budget for the department is $3.5 million annually. That does include the chief marketing office. That does include economic development staff. And so the total that we have for out-of-state promotional is about $2 million in a year. So
Okay.
this would be in addition to that.
Okay.
In terms of the timing for this money right now, I mean, we've definitely talked about this in terms of, supporting the sector, getting folks back in, that the economic recovery money, whether it's the state funds or it's the restaurant revitalization fund that you just mentioned, that is critical to helping these businesses stay open. But it's the long-term, reinforcing those spending patterns, having people come back to Vermont, not losing folks to other nearby states because they're doing more marketing. And then, you know, we want to make sure that that brand affinity for Vermont stays very strong, both in our drive market and to introduce new people, you know, who haven't been to Vermont, but, you know, maybe now have heard how well Vermont actually did manage the pandemic and are looking for someplace that might be a little bit farther afield, are looking for the wide open spaces, the kind of experiences that we can provide. So, you know, with the CRF funding, for instance, we were able to work with Discovery Networks and Outside TV to do national cable advertising and connected TV. So that's your streaming services. That gets us to a national audience we'd never been able to do before. So, you know, we would look to be, we were able to create assets that now we have that we can just rerun. We also look at tactics, you know, native advertising is something that we do quite a bit. So if you think about, you know, articles that are written in, you know, we use this technique last fall to get the ski safety messaging out, but, you know, articles in the Wall Street Journal or, you know, New York Magazine, Eater, like different publications that are different, depends on the audience, that are more niche. So Outside Magazine, if we're looking for outdoor enthusiasts, you know, Eater, New York Magazine, if we want to talk about the culinary assets that Vermont has to offer. You know, we're looking now for the next season coming up as to, you know, how can we reach, you know, different affinity groups. You know, we're looking at a content program to reach the LGBT community. We're looking at, you know, how could we do some native advertising to support the wedding and events industry. So that's where, you know, a journalist comes up to Vermont, they do a video, they write an article that's reinforced with social, we reach all their networks. So it's different kind of tactics like that. We also do, you know, digital display advertising.
Let me stop you there because
Yeah.
I'm very interesting. So that's part of your marketing budget? Somehow you figure out a way to get stories about Vermont in journals, and where are the dollars going there? Let's say you get an article about some event or new program in Vermont in the Wall Street Journal, and is that for salaries in your department to work with the journal? How does that money get spent on something like that?
So that money goes directly to the media company. And so then they would, you know, they would bring someone here to Vermont to do the filming for, if they were going to do a video or so forth, something like that. Is that your question?
There are media companies that say, give us some money and we'll try and generate some stories for you.
Yeah, we talk to them very specifically about what the deliverables will be. So it's not just like, so it's different than earned media, where we might pitch an idea and say, hey, we'd really love for you to write a story about Vermont. We do that as well. But with paid opportunities like this, we will negotiate a price, and it's like, okay, that's going to be, the article's going to be this long. That's going to be, you know, reinforced with X many social posts. You know, you're going to tag us, we're going to tag you. You guarantee us this many impressions. You know, there's just be added value with additional, you know, I had started to mention we do display advertising. So that's, you know, on websites you go to. So for instance, there would be also ads on, you know, a site like, you know, the Boston Globe to drive traffic to the article itself, so that it's not, you know, if you didn't find the article on your own, we're also driving traffic to that article. So it's a package that goes with that, so that we then can see not only exactly what we're getting for that investment, but then when we're looking at that return on investment, when we talk about native advertising, one of the measures we use is time on page. So really that's time spent with the brand. So, you know, when somebody spends 4 to 5 minutes reading an article about Vermont, that's, for as far as we're concerned, that's a huge, you know, we've gotten a real chunk of their time, other than, you know, the seconds it might take for someone to see a display ad on the screen. You know, when we ran the native content in the Wall Street Journal for ski safety, we saw a time on page of almost 7 minutes, which is amazing. So it's just a longer form kind of vehicle. And that's what we really try to do with it. It's a huge variety of tactics. So it's really, you know, marketing is about repetition. It's about, you know, how many different touch points can we find people? You know, it's, you know, once we make that connection, then, you know, hopefully they sign up for our newsletter, or they're involved in, you know, social media, so we can continue to reinforce that message with them. And so you know, the resources are really about increasing that reach, increasing the repetition of message, making sure that we can compete with the messages that they're hearing from other places, and do that in a variety of different channels so that we just reach different types of people. So we do streaming audio on, Pandora, Spotify, as somebody might listen to their media that way. Other people consume media in all sorts of different ways. So, we really concentrate on that breadth of approaches. And that's what additional resources helps us to do. It just helps us to look beyond kind of the tried and true and say like, hey, let's try this because, we really want to reach new people.
Mr. Chair, Keisha has a question.
Senator Ram?
So, I don't know how long we, want to spend on this total. First of all, Heather, one of the things you said was hopefully they sign up for a newsletter. I hope if they like other metrics besides how long they spend on the page, like what actions they take after that. If you see a rise in, any kind of metrics that you can measure after you put out an ad like this, after that it's run in high concentration for a certain period of time. And then second, I'm really curious, like if you talk to businesses in the tourism industry, are they saying that this is their highest priority for $2 million from the state? Because what I'm worried about is that we want to advertise that we have a safe experience here. And I am hearing from most businesses that they want to be able to provide that safe experience, and they want to be able to have enough workers to provide that safe experience. Not to make it personal, I'm getting married this summer. Like I'm trying to help my relatives and loved ones find places to stay in Addison County, in August. And it's not easy, it's not, they're still trying to safely reopen. And so I don't hear businesses saying, just spend the money advertising to people. I hear them saying like, we need to reopen safely with enough workers and give people the true Vermont magical experience. And I personally don't feel like, I don't think the $2 million is poorly spent, but is it the highest and best use of our money right now in this transition out of a public health crisis?
I think that's a great question. What I would say is that actually this is exactly what I hear from businesses, is that what they see the role of the state is that doing that brand awareness marketing to fill that marketing funnel so people are thinking about Vermont, so that then they will say like, okay, I want to go to Vermont. I've got all these great ideas for how I'm going to spend that time. I'm going to find, some place to stay in X area. And then, we can then funnel those customers down to that local inn so that they have the business. So then they can, keep their staff employed and that stream of customers. So that, that's what I hear over and over and over again, is like, we can't reach the number of people and the breadth of the reach that the state has. No individual business in any can touch that. And they rely on us to make sure that people are thinking about Vermont. And then when they get lower down the funnel and they say, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to go to Vermont, then they'll look and say like, okay, this is the exact property. This is the place I'm going to go. And we kind of like, pass off the torch, so to speak.
Okay.
Can I ask, can you send a link to this ad is this the ad that you would be putting out there? And what are the main media markets that you plan to put it in?
Well, what I can do is, as I offered, I have a report that I put together where we spent the money from last fall, which is, it's a good example of the types of different tactics and we wouldn't obviously be talking about quarantine required, but it gives you the kind of examples that I think that you're looking for.
But in an ad, like you have a YouTube link or something to the ad that you said you had I thought I understood that you had an ad and you've already done the work to create the media. You just need to put it out there. Do you have?
We do. We have lots. We do lots of different things. In that report, there is a link to one of the ads that we did on Outside TV. It's one ad, but it's a
good ad.
But I'm more than happy for you to look at that. I would just say like, there's a huge breadth of work that the department creates. So try not to judge us on one ad.
So Heather, thank you very much. This has been helpful. I have one question that follows up on Senator Rahm's question, then we're going to break for 15 minutes and come back. But so I remember a few years ago, the Chamber of Commerce, I think it was the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, was pushing really hard to get your budget up $500,000 for direct out-of-state marketing. Here, the House has done a fivefold effort, and in the last year, you had much more than that for direct advertising. But I guess I'm trying to, it's very similar to Senator Rahm's question. If we were to give $1 million, if we had $1 million to give to your department and you went out and to the Chamber of Commerce, who was in the past arguing for more out-of-state marketing, and said to them, here's $1 million, you can use it for regional consumer stimulus for your downtown businesses, or we can spend it on out-of-state marketing. Do you know if you would get a clear choice there and as an answer from the Chamber of Commerce?
I think the clear choice would be out-of-state marketing, no doubt.
Okay. Okay.
Because
Okay.
that's the role that nobody else can play.
Yeah, but we're also coming out of pandemic, and we could use a shot in the arm for these retail establishments. Anyhow, we'll discuss it more.
Yeah,
So let's take a
I
break.
mean, I would totally agree. I think a split approach is great, but if you ask me to pick one.
Let's go. Let's come back at 10 o'clock, and we'll start talking about the Senate appropriations request.